love to have a conversation about forgiveness. I have such a hard time expressing my understanding of the difference between forgiveness and understanding someone. But it feels like it's key to the whole thing.
So that understanding piece is, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that what you wish more people would be able to take away from this work, is having understanding?
I think so. And honestly, I think if you could simply have Mark's work in just the exercises, without the build-up of explanation of how everything works and why it's passed on and da-da-da-da-da. You see, the catch is, as soon as a mind goes into the thinking of guilt and shame and doubt, well, you've just triggered the sympathetic nervous system, which takes the frontal lobe offline, and it goes into your instinctual patterns. Well, your instinctual patterns are set by the epigenetics, which were in your mother's eggs when her mother was carrying her.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, when we read the first part of Mark's book, it triggers us into that, and then all of a sudden we aren't discovering things with a fresh new mind. We're in our limbic brain of sympathetic reaction. But if we could just take his exercises, and do them with a fresh mind, without reading why we're doing it or what, all of that, I think it would have so much more potential. But now I'm in this problem of, well, we don't really want to do something unless we understand what it's going to do for us and how it's going to work. So now the mind is like, oh, I want to be cautious because I don't want to just do something blindly. Well, now you got to explain what it is, which gets you into this loop of shame and guilt and doubt, potentially. Well, now the exercises aren't quite as effective.
Do you notice that more with mothers? Has that been your experience? You see that more in...
Well, this is an interesting one, too, because I don't know very many men who have read this book. Men tend to look at it and go, what? I don't need that. It's the women who are interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in training, it was 98% women in there and a sprinkling of men, and the men seemed to be out of place.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that the possibility of offsetting that with the idea that we can break some of those generational patterns? As a mom, I know, speaking from my own personal experience, if I thought there was a way to prevent my kids from having to go through some of those same things, I would be much more inclined to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a possibility that that is something that could be shared with mothers before the guilt and shame starts to seep in, or what are your thoughts?
It's almost as though we need to be reassured that there's light at the end of this tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
or there's a ladder to get out of it. Like, there is a way out before you even start into it. And I find that interesting too. It's another thing that I've observed facilitating some of this work is almost the first thing a mother wants to do is bring their child in. They want their child to do this work. And in reality, the mothers that I've seen do the work for themselves change their children without ever even telling the children that they're doing the work. Because if you change your relationship with, your understanding, your experience with your mother by understanding her experience of her mother, you will then change how you relate to your children and your grandchildren. And the more that you, as the mother, resolve those kinds of things and come to peace with them, not forgiveness, but peace, it'll totally change the dynamic of your relationships of your children and grandchildren. So it's your work as a mother, not your child's work. And there's another whole discussion that's like so interesting.
So do you think that work could spiderweb out across other relationships as well? So it holds
Absolutely.
true that if you do the work to change and resolve things within yourself, that will affect your children. It seems that it would also affect your work relationships, your
Absolutely.
personal relationships.
Absolutely.
So it seems like it would have a ripple effect.
Yep.
As well.
Reminds me of one thing I wanted to share with you. So if you think about a pyramid, if you think about that, you've got mom and dad and child, right? Mom and dad would together support a child or the children. But how often is it that the child feels like they need to take care of mom, or they need to take care of dad, or they need to take sides? And what happens is it goes like this, and the child becomes a parent to parents. And now it's upside down, and you can just imagine if you're the child and you've got all this weight that was never meant to be yours to begin with in an ideal world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a big burden. But if you can turn that back around where you say, oh, I understand why my parents didn't necessarily create this foundation that supported me, because guess what? They were like this too. And their parents were like this too. Like, this pyramid's been upside down for generations.
Long time.
And somewhere along the line you'll say, oh, well, yeah, this was an upside down pyramid because somebody was an orphan. They had to be their own parents, or they didn't have parents. Or, oh my gosh, this happened or that happened. There was abuse, there was neglect, there was something that, unforeseeable circumstances with few options that led to, oh crap. And under the circumstances, they did the best they could. And you start thinking about men who go to war and they end up doing things that are unthinkable, or they see things that are unthinkable. They end up doing things unthinkable because if they don't, they're not going to survive. And they want to preserve their life, or their buddies are going to not survive. Like, it just blows your mind. And then they can't come home and talk about it. Because who would they be if somebody really knew their reality? There's a lot of that that's deep in the genetics. Now here's the thing. Gotta start, like, right off the bat. The genetics can be changed. Not the genetics, but the way your genetics respond, whether they turn on, turn off, whether they go left, they go right, all of that is fluid. And who's the doctor that Biology of Belief.
Dr. Joe?
No.
Oh, or Bruce Lipton?
Bruce Lipton. Biology of Belief. His work, totally super, super interesting on the topic. And I started realizing that what we were taught as genetics is like, it's permanent. There's nothing you can do. But his work showed, no, things totally change depending on what environment they're raised, what's going on in the environment. And if we can recognize that our genetics are turned on because of something like that, and that if we just shift our perception of it, the meaning of it, it will totally change how our epigenetics express themselves. And you'll shift from being in a sympathetic fight, flight, freeze, fawn response to the parasympathetic of rest, restore, heal, rejuvenate, thrive. You go from survival mode to thrive. What a difference. Like, that's where it's got to start. You're not getting all this information so that you can feel horrible about life and even like there's nothing you can do. You're getting this information for a level of understanding so that you understand why it's so important to shift the meaning that you've assigned to things. Which then changes the way your genetics express themselves, which then changes the way that you interact with the world on a personal, on relationship basis, which changes your whole energy. And it changes from we're going to survive and we're going to fight to we're going to thrive and explore. Totally different world. One other thing I want to share with you, you mentioned break the cycle. Everybody talks about fighting cancer and breaking the cycle and these kinds of things. Well, to me, words matter. And what I always want to say is, I would encourage you to think of it as healing a cycle as opposed to breaking it.
Would healing imply that it was broken to begin with?
Healing
Perhaps resolving is...
You could certainly resolve. Something is off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying you want to how do I put this? It's except to saying, well, when I say to you, we're going to go fight something, what's your reaction?
Well, I already know the answer.
You're going to do this. You need fists. You need to guard. You need your sympathetic response if you're going to go fight. Well, sympathetic response is not conducive to healing. It's conducive to surviving under the worst situation. You need a parasympathetic response of rest and rejuvenate, rest and recover. So if sympathetic is fighting or breaking, fighting, breaking, then parasympathetic healing, parasympathetic is healing, restoring, exactly what you're talking about. And I feel like just the words we use, if we say, yeah, we're going to break these things, it has more to do, like that will prime the sympathetic nervous system to survival mode. But if we say we're going to heal it or we're going to restore it, we're more likely to engage the parasympathetic system.
Makes a lot of sense.
It's all semantics, but it matters.
It does matter.
Yep.
Thank you for answering those questions for me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
We'll see you next time.